a young man emailed me, and he asked me the question. He said, somebody told me that a man having long hair is wrong, is a sin. And so he asked me, he said, is that a sin? Is that a sin? What he was making reference to is 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 14. Here's what it says. Even nature itself teaches you that wearing long hair is shameful for a man. They said somebody found that in the Bible. This young man had long hair. He had long braids or dreadlocks or whatever it was, but it was long. It was long. And somebody had sent him that scripture. And so now he's confused, feeling that his hairstyle has him now in sin. And I wanted to tell him, young man, if your hairstyle is the only problem that you have, you're in great shape. But here's what I wanted to help him to understand. See, immediately when he said that to me, immediately I began to help him to understand the scripture through culture. Because at a time, in the time of the Corinthian church, hear me carefully, in the time of the Corinthian church, there were male prostitutes and female prostitutes. The female prostitutes identified themselves as prostitutes by shaving their hair off. So they had shaved heads, the female prostitutes, and it identified a woman as a female prostitute. And so what happened when the Apostle Paul began to go into Corinth and preach, many of these female prostitutes got saved. They came into the church with shaved head looking like prostitutes. Paul says, don't come in here without your head covered, because you're going to distract the brothers who are in the house. They're going to think you're at work trying to advertise. Do you understand the culture? And the flip side of that, male prostitutes wore their hair long to indicate that they were prostitute. That was that culture. That was that culture. So long hair for men in that culture signified male prostitute. A shaved hair for a woman indicated female prostitute. See, in our society today, a female prostitute has on high gloss. She's all made up. She's got hair, it's all bouffanted, and she's got on short shorts, Daisy Dukes, and stilettos. See, they have a different uniform. They have a different way. Every culture has a different way by which they identify their prostitutes. See, it was not permissible for their women to walk down the streets in those cultures there with flesh exposed. They couldn't do that. So the way that they showed that they were a woman of the night, they worked the red light district. They shaved their hair, and that let them know, baby, I'm in business. Look here, look here. And the way that the men indicated was through their long hair. So now when you have to understand that in context. In fact, 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 6 says this. If a woman does not cover her head, she should have her hair cut off. But since it is shameful for a woman to cut off her hair or to shave her head, she should cover her head. And the reason that it was is because it indicated prostitution. Can you understand that? Now, so here's a young man in America who has long braids, and somebody's making him feel like he's in sin. And another thing that made me think about this, it wasn't the first time that I had encountered a question like that, because I was walking with my father one time. We were downtown, and there was a street preacher on the street preaching, and he saw my daddy walk by with his long white hair, and this man pulled this scripture up and said, it's a shame for a man to wear long hair. And my daddy turned to him and he said, young man, Jesus had long hair. We're in the hair business. It is what it is. But you have to understand the cultural context, because culture can define what is sin in that culture. See, so the short hair for women identified them as a prostitute. Long hair for men identified the men as a prostitute in that culture, and only in that culture. So if that's not an indication in our culture, it wouldn't have the same implication, and it would not be a distraction in worship in the house of the Lord. It would not be a distraction. So you have to understand the cultural context. Remember, as we're dealing with things, 5 keys to interpretation. Deal with content, the raw material. Secondly, the context. Understand what was said before and what follows, the pretext and the post-text. Help us to understand the context. Comparison, use Scripture to interpret Scripture. Culture, please understand, consider the customs and the practices of that time. The customs and the practices of that time, because they help to understand a thing. You remember the parable about the woman who had lost a coin, and she searched the house frantically trying to find that coin. She turned on the light and swept the house totally clean, trying to find that coin. Because you know what the significance of that was? It was a necklace. And a married woman had 10 coins on her necklace. 10 is sort of a number of completion. And she had lost one of the coins, so she has 9. And in that culture, when a woman was caught in adultery, they would snatch off one of the coins to identify that this is an adulteress. So can you imagine? Homegirl had lost one of her coins, making her now look like an adulteress. So she turns on the light. She is tearing that house inside out, looking for that one coin, the one coin that was lost. In that culture, it signified that she had been a dishonorable, disreputable woman and had committed adultery. So having 9 coins on her necklace indicated, a woman that had broken the law. And so shame would have come on her. You can understand why she was so frantic to find that one coin, because in that culture, and that's why you have to understand the culture. You have to understand the culture. I was in Israel, 1980, and I had read, how John the Baptist ate locust and wild honey. While I'm driving through Jerusalem, I look up and I see the stuff that looked like peas in a pod hanging off of a tree, and I stop and ask the guide, "What is that?" He says to me, "That's locust." To me, locust is a grasshopper kind of an insect. I thought John was eating insects. It was a vegetation that grew on a tree. I didn't understand the culture. I didn't understand the culture. You have to understand the culture. You have to understand the culture. And if you don't understand the culture, you'll misjudge things. The sin of transposition is taking something out of one culture, trying to force it into another culture. The gospel is not about the transposition of culture. It's about truth that works in every culture. The cultural trappings are variables. Truth is constant. Okay? So there are certain things that are in Jewish culture that we don't pull over into our culture. That was the whole idea of how they started preaching about circumcision. And Paul had to finally put an end to this issue, because they were getting Christians saved, and then the whole idea is that if you're going to be a Christian, do you have to be circumcised? Because all of the Jews were circumcised, show that they were in covenant with God. And he says, listen, neither circumcision or uncircumcision is anything in your flesh. He says what really matters is that you got circumcision of the heart. You've got to understand the truth of it. You can take all of these things, because you can be washing your hands and be ceremonially clean, but be defiled inwardly. Jesus says you are dead men's bones, because they were obeying all of the cultural things and on their way to hell. And so he was helping them to understand the cultural context. But truth is the constant, and the culture is the variable. The culture is the variable. Sometimes we've sinned in America. We've erred in America as we transported the gospel to other nations. We exported with the truth of the gospel American culture. Christianity is not American culture. We exported the culture, the culture, the culture. We don't preach culture, we're preaching Christ. Christ in the culture, who transcends the culture. Because when you're a real Christian, it'll work whether you're an American or whether you're Korean or Japanese and Italian or German, whether you're Bolivian and Colombian, it doesn't matter. Christ transcends culture.